There it is. Got it. All right. Good afternoon, everybody. The presentation today that we're going over, he introduced it as kind of a brand and web marketing audit. And today specifically, we'll be looking specifically at the brand piece of that. As I started looking through the presentation, I thought that deserved some time to really go over. I think it's a piece that a lot of organizations enjoy going through, like going through, and I think it'd be very useful and helpful. And the web audit is something else that we can kind of get into on another session if we wanted to, if there was any demand or people wanted to kind of look more into how to audit beyond just the web, all of your other marketing that's out there, look at potential ideas and solutions to take the brand piece and start turning it into some actionable steps. And that's really what the second part of that is taking that and turning it into an actionable, the actionable steps. My slides aren't, there it goes. So this first part is what we call kind of finding your brand story. And so I'll just hop right into it. This may be a concept that you are familiar with, you may or may not be, but when you're looking at your brand story, there are three basic layers that you're looking into. And what we really want to focus on is a term that I think is becoming more and more popular, which is your why. And this chart here was actually developed by, I have it down here at the bottom, Simon Sinek. And it really just reflects methodology and procedure that I think a lot of ad agencies have used over time. And it's really gained a lot more significance. And he put into words things I think that a lot of people were either practicing or thinking or wanting. And one of the things that I'll kind of note is that my experience in the ad world started at quite a few different ad agencies around the city. And as I went through those agencies, one thing I kind of realized when it came to advertising and marketing is a lot of it felt disingenuous. It felt very either that you're trying to sell something that isn't real, that you're not really telling the truth, or that you are, but it really isn't very inspiring. And so this methodology is really to help you get into that part that connects with people, the emotional part. So a lot of people, when they market, they focus on either the what or the how. And the what is every organization knows what they do. And these are the products and services that you sell or produce. It's the basically the root of what you do as an organization. That's your what. How is something that I think a few less organizations know, but they still know it pretty well, which is how you do your what. And these are things that make you special, that set you apart from your competition, that you do things a little bit differently than everybody else does it. But the part that we like to at least focus on at the very beginning, from a marketing perspective, is the why. And very few organizations know why they do what they do. The why is not about making money, that's a result. It's not about necessarily donors, getting more donations in. Those are a result of developing your why. The why isn't even the people that you serve. That's still a result as well. But why do you do what you do? Why? What drives you? What motivates you? And so those are the questions that we really, really want to dive into. And how to get to that why can be done a number of ways. And this is a process we've evolved over time. And this is what we've really found works for a lot of our clients. So this is a quote that Simon Sinek kind of wraps up when he's discussing this process, which is, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. The goal isn't to sell to people who need what you have, but to sell to people who believe what you believe. And he gets into a lot more detail on the psychology and the physiology of why this is true. It's basically a correlation of how your brain works, and that people really do support you when they buy into not what you're doing, but why you're doing it. And when you make that connection, that why is subconscious more than it is conscious. But when you find a way to communicate it, that's what sticks with people more than anything else. So when you identify and call out your business purpose, you will drive true loyalty and engagement. So the first part of finding your why that we look at the things we want to kind of go over are a series of questions that we ask. And there's a lot more that we'll typically ask when we go through this process. We're going through this process now with Sport Kansas City, so a lot of this will be familiar. If especially with a lot of the team that's on here, you'll recognize a lot of this. But it's divided up into these sections. The first part of finding your why is understanding your personal story. This is each employee, everybody on the board, whoever has some stakeholder interaction with you can bring their personal story into play. And a lot of that can go into answering the question, what is your why? Each employee's personal story can get you closer in understanding your brand story. Because whether you articulate your story well or not, you do have a story. And story is how you start to explain to people or express to people what you're about without just telling them, here's our services and here's what we do. So the better you understand it, the better you can mold it and change it. So one of the best processes that you can start to do with this personal story is you identify who those stakeholders are that you want to get in touch with. And this was a slide I think that was in here, but it may come a little bit later, I think. But essentially, the first step before you get into personal story is identifying the key stakeholders that you want to talk to. What I have found is that talking to, we do a series of surveys. You can do some self-reflection, but really talking to people is the best way to start to take that brand story and your why and start to let it bubble up and come out. So what we found works is typically between maybe 10, 15, it depends on how much time you have or so, individual interviews that we like to do. We've also done this in a group where we ask certain questions in a group and people will engage with us and we're all together in a room. But what I have found really, really works, the place where we get really honest and get some really good feedback are just one-on-one sessions where people feel like they're not, where they can speak a little more freely. So anyway, the sample questions that we have in telling the personal story may be things like, how did you find out about this organization? What attracted you to the organization? What were your first impressions and what are your impressions now? What changed from the time that you first got introduced to them versus what you see now? So a lot of times that first impression may just be what you thought of them. It may be because the organization itself has evolved. But understanding that personal story that somebody has experienced helps you get a lot closer to your why. The next piece is the brand story. Every brand has a story to tell. So your individual organization, then you get into that story. With some help, it can be a great story that moves people to act. And our job is typically to answer questions and work exercises that lead us into figuring out what that story is. And when we're talking about the brand story, we're looking for human truth behind the organization, a way of presenting the brand that's believable and interesting because it's true. One of the things that I was saying earlier on is, working for a lot of different brands, one thing that you kind of find out in a lot of advertising is that people will tell stories, but it doesn't mean a lot because you don't feel, it feels fake. It doesn't feel like it's true. The key part of this in understanding and communicating what's real and what's right is making sure that it is true. But I do have a caveat too when I tell people that you're looking for truth. is it can also be aspirationally true. It doesn't have to, it could be something that you want your organization to become, in which case we kind of turn these questions into a mirror and we look at it and we say, how do we make these more true? And we'll come back to that question in a second. Some of the questions that you might ask when you're exploring the brand story to your stakeholders are, what do you do as an organization? And can you communicate that without talking about your services? Can you say, here's what we do, without saying, in the case of Port Kansas City, for example, you know, accounting and database work and governance and those elements that they do, can we say what it is you do without talking about your services? Another question sometimes is just describe a memorable moment within the organization. What sets you apart? What makes you different? What features of the organization are different? And another one that really kind of helps is just to tell us a story. Is there a story that you've experienced? Or maybe it's some legend, some kind of story you've heard, you know, from somebody else that's gone down and been passed down over the years that really sums up how the organization got started. But what are those stories? The stories really help get us to the why. Next is your purpose. A purpose statement states the organization's why in its purest form. After these 5 points, I'm going to just look at a few other organizations and their purpose statements. You know what we mean by that. But in this one, it's less literal, it's more emotional. What drives you? A great purpose statement gives all stakeholders a sense of the character of the organization, which is proven out by its actions. Purpose is what guides you. So some sample questions you might ask when you're trying to figure out what your purpose is why do you exist? What do you stand for? What motivates you? And what are you passionate about? Those things can, but they don't necessarily have to tie directly to your main services. It's really helpful to just get honest and just have the stakeholders just say, what are you passionate about? Even if you're trying to answer these questions from an organizational perspective, but you're also trying to answer this from a personal perspective. And so what is your purpose within the organization is a helpful way to think of that question. The next one are beliefs. And this is the one that we tend to focus a lot on, at least in our final presentation. And you'll see this in some examples that we give. But most of the belief statements will come after our interviews are over with. So we don't, sometimes I'll ask these questions to people, but from the personal story, brand story, purpose, even brand voice, these are, the belief statements are usually things that we perceive from those. But I also like to ask these questions directly to people. And we've also found it really useful if when you're defining what your beliefs are, if you say them in this way, we believe, or you know, your organization believes. In doing that, it becomes less of what you believe as a person, and you start to get into the mindset of what does the organization really believe. And those belief statements, some of them that we look at are, what do you believe about the industry that you're in? What do you believe about your coworkers? What do you believe about your customers? What do you believe about the community that you serve? And what do you believe about the world in general? And you'll notice these questions get very narrow and they become more broad. The idea is that we're just trying to dig into people's heart a little bit and figure out what is it. These are some questions that start to get into what drives them. Then the last point is a series of questions that we get into are brand voice. Excuse me. And a brand's voice is made up of words and phrases and characteristics that set the brand apart. So what does your brand sound like? What is the tone? What's the attitude? To be successful, this voice, again, is something that rings with truth. It feels personal. Oops, excuse me. I went a little too far here. It feels personal, trustworthy, and human. It's what makes people interesting is that everyone is unique. Every organization is unique. They have something different to offer that the other organizations don't. So everyone has their own voice. So the components of the brand voice that we look into a little bit more are personality, attributes, benefits, and culture. So just a couple of questions for each one. When you're looking into personality, sometimes one of the ones that we have a series of questions, it's not just these, But these are the ones I thought kind of stood out, and that a lot of people, I think we get a lot of interesting results from. The personality one is interesting, and that is, what company or celebrity would you compare yourself most closely with? Sometimes we ask that question in the form of, if your organization had a mascot or a spokesperson, who would that person be? Like, who would be the best person to speak to your organization? And sometimes that can give us some insight into your personality. And when we talk about what other company or organization is like yours, we're trying to find organizations that have nothing to do with yours. So maybe a for-profit company, maybe an organization that doesn't do what you do at all, but just something that has the similar feel or similar things that they do, that you say, we would love to be like that, perceived in that way. That helps identify your personality. The next one are attributes, which are, what are the things that you do best? What things could be improved? I think those kind of questions lead to attributes. Again, there's a lot more of these questions that we have that we can look at, especially if you're going through this process and you want other questions that target attributes. We have a bunch that we can kind of go over with you. But benefits are another. What sets you apart? What's your contribution to the nonprofit community? And what value does your service provide? And the final question that you can ask your stakeholders is, what's the culture feel like when people walk through your doors, or they talk to you individually, or the employees that work for you, or whoever interacts with you? What does that feel like to be a part of this organization? What does that culture feel like? And then what do you want it to feel like? That's, again, another aspirational question. It doesn't have to always be, here's exactly what it is. It could be, we wish we were perceived this way. And we'll get into why that is in a moment. But I wanted to go over, if you recall, our third bullet were purpose statements. And I wanted to go through this but just to kind of give you an idea of what a purpose statement looks like. This is not your why statement that we're talking about. These are just some really famous ones that you may or may not be aware of. One is, we exist to connect people to what's important in their lives through friendly, reliable, and low-cost air travel. They may have some problems with that now, but that one is Southwest Airlines. Another famous purpose statement, we put smiles on the faces of everyone we touch. That's Nintendo. Another one, we bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. And if you have a body, you're an athlete. That's Nike. And the other one is, we make people happy. That's Disney. I have another series of these that are for nonprofits. I didn't add those to this presentation, but you know, looking at other people's, other organizations' purpose statement can help you start to figure out what that looks like. But those questions that we asked earlier on kind of help you get to those purpose statements. But the one thing I do want to say in all of this is, in going through all those questions, the one thing that you're just looking to get in it is some kind of insight that digs into the heart of who you are and what you're about. Insight is really the goal of these exercises more than anything else. And so I have this definition that I'm working through on what insight is, and it's kind of this combination of data plus beliefs. And so I kind of word it this way: insight is truth, but it's almost better than truth. Insight can be more moldable than truth, because insight has an expiration date. What was once true may not be true anymore. What is true for one person may not be true for everyone. Insight is truth without expectation or boundaries. It's a glimpse into a moment of time when everything converges and the world makes sense. Insight can evolve or be built upon. Insight isn't exhaustive or complete. Sometimes when you're looking through these questions, you're not looking for like the perfect answer or the perfect thing. You're just looking for something that really connects, that just speaks to you and says, oh my gosh, that really says who we are, at least for the moment, and that can change. Insight isn't exhaustive or complete. It fills in the gaps, but also creates new ones. You don't need to figure it all out or uncover all the answers. You're just searching for that hook that others can hang their hat on. But to have meaning, again, this is one thing I keep reiterating, is it has to be true. And to hit on that aspirational point, this is one of my own quotes I say a lot, is that you can use these exercises and these questions as a mirror, because it is aspirational. And we should always be asking ourselves, okay, here's our belief statements. Here are the things that come from these questions. How do we make these things more true in our organization? Because as much as we want to figure out what the message is, sometimes the best message is improving how your organization operates. That's sometimes the best marketing tool that you've got. And so to look at those belief statements and then turn it back on yourself and say, how do we make this more true, can be one of the most powerful marketing tools you ever really come across. So then what we end up doing with all those questions is we create buckets, and we take all our belief statements, and sometimes when I write out those belief statements that come from these exercises, they get pretty hairy in the sense that sometimes there's 3 or 4 pages worth. And so I'm trying to narrow them down, but I put them into a bucket of, here are some beliefs. Here's what stands out. Here are the beliefs that pass the BS meter. What beliefs convey an emotional response? And from there, we look at, okay, what is that one thing? The why really starts to emerge as you look at those belief statements. And you continue to uncover stories, and you ask yourself, is the story an indication of a bigger truth? Is this story some kind of legend, as we talked about earlier? And then from there, you start to look at, once you have that core thing, you can go back to your beliefs and start to look at what are some ways we can make this belief more true, as we had just said. What one thing emerges from the clutter? What ideas emerge that can connect your why to your audience? So there's a lot of different ways. Once you have that why statement figured out and down, it can really start to unveil new functions, new features, new ways of doing things, new ways of seeing things. And so it's a really, really helpful exercise. And this is kind of what I mean. The belief statements here are what we have in blue. And this was for a crowdsourced collaboration tool that we were building. And we kind of came to our one thing in this example, which was using the collective mind to design thinking standards and technology. But the bigger one thing was to make ideas better and help ideas happen. And so that was derived from the blue circles, which are our belief statements. And then each of those blue circles, we started to brainstorm, what are ways we can make that more true? That's what those red circles are there. So that's just kind of a way that we start to take this exercise and start to build out not just the messaging, which is the yellow circle, but some of the actionable things and some things that we can do with those purpose and belief statements. The ideas really start to come across when you build that out. The next thing I kind of want to look into then, once you have those belief statements, I'm not sure if you're familiar with these, but it's something that I think a lot of brand agencies tend to. If you start to do any kind of Google search on this, you'll see it come up more and more. If you do a search for brand archetypes, you'll find all kinds of resources for this, so it's a good term to search. But it's basically a brand personality test. Determining your brand personality can provide a lot of key insights for how to communicate your brand to clients and donors. I'll give you a few examples. There are 12 that are typically identified. But these archetypes, like I said, are like a personality test, and you're a combination of a lot of different traits. So you're not going to necessarily fall under one of these brand archetypes. But I have in the top right corner here, it says search brand archetype quiz. If you do a search for that, this is one that I've used quite a bit before, brand personality quiz, but there are quite a few of these resources out there. Now you will find, if you do that search, you'll find a lot of brand organizations that basically just use tools that are out there, and they make it part of their own kind of tool as a new business opportunity to try to get your business. But any of those are really, I like to, sometimes it's helpful to fill out more than one of those. And if you're If this is something you're really interested in, I can give you some of those tools that I like to use to help identify that. But in those, starting with the innocent, we have the brand archetypes are innocent, the sage, the wise kind of sage, the explorer, the maverick, the magician, the hero, the lover, the jester, the every person, the caregiver, the ruler, and the creator. Now, each of those, I'm going to give you some examples. I didn't outline all 12 of those because I didn't want to spend a lot of time really getting into the brand archetype. But once you take your belief statements and you start to do some of these questionnaires, it'll give you just a little more insight. It's really, really helpful. That if you understand 2 or 3 of your brand archetypes, it'll give you some really good insight on how to talk about yourself. I'll give you a few quick examples. One was creator, and this is an example from one we did recently. But the creator archetype is to give vision or to give form to a vision. Any brand that dismantles old systems or processes and creates something new in its place would be expressing the creator archetype. The organizational structure, whether loose or ordered, is always collaborative. Teamwork and brainstorming sessions are critical, yet must still allow employees autonomy and the freedom to create. Some creator brands that you might be familiar with are Crayola, Sony, YouTube, Adobe, Lego, and Canon. I'm just going to go through 3 of these. Another popular brand archetype is the explorer. The explorer seeks out new things. They're independent and brave. The explorer is motivated to experience new things. Pushing boundaries and taking risks are commonplace. The explorer wants the freedom to forge a unique path and focus on self-discovery. Some explorer brands are Jeep, REI, NASA, Starbucks. And then another one, the last one I'll just look into here is the Maverick, which is, I think it was listed on another slide as something different, but the Maverick is kind of the term I like to use over the one we had on the previous slide. But this brand archetype challenges what's not working and liberates others from conventional ways. These are unconventional and revolutionary. The Maverick lives to break down barriers, and nothing will stand in their way. They will carve out a new path from what is not working. They're always looking for new ways of doing things and sometimes they're looking to be new just to be new. Some of the Maverick brands are PayPal. They have an old money versus new money campaign that kind of dives into that Maverick idea. Tesla and Urban Outfitters are other kind of these Maverick type brands. But nonprofits fit into those 12 categories as well, typically. So it is a really good exercise to go through for any organization, including a nonprofit. So finally, just to kind of go back into that why message. As you write out the answers to all those questions that we looked at earlier, and as you build other questions and you start to interview and do surveys, and you really start to look at your stakeholders and ask them honestly what those ideas are about your organization, your why will kind of start to pop out. And but a lot of people mistake the why for a tagline. They look at it and just see, a lot of times it's very short, very concise. Usually when we come up with our why statement, it's 2 words, 3 words, 5 words. And so it feels like a tagline that should just go along with your logo. But it's not. It's the thing that fires you up and motivates you. A lot of times the why sometimes it becomes the tagline. Other times people never see it. They only see the results of that why statement. It's okay that it's not a tagline. It's just, what is that one thing that's really, really true that kind of cuts through everything else? Once you have your why, you have to own it. You have to make it your home. And a home is a very common term in the ad industry too. It's basically where you start to drive that thing that you want to own home, and you come up with other ways to show off and share that this is your why. It's a place where the term or phrase extends into your brand so that they become synonymous. In many cases, like I said, it's not a tagline at all. You just have to carry it and find unique ways to express it.